Okay, so welcome to Chapter 9, where we will be discussing the issues and challenges of food and hunger. So we've been talking about population growth and how we can measure that and track that, things that influence it. Well, food availability and the quality of food is definitely a major factor in any population growth or populations, whether we're talking about growth or decline or stabilization of a population. If you don't have enough to eat, it's hard to reproduce, it's hard to be successful and continue to adapt and evolve and all those things. So in this chapter, we're going to focus primarily on how food and hunger issues influence a human population growth. These concepts, though, can roll over and be applied to a lot of other species. We tend to think of it differently when we talk about humans because we actively make our own food and grow our own food and raise it. But there are other species out there that will do the exact same thing as us. Leafcutter ants in the rainforest, they actually raise fungus as a source of food. They're gardeners just like us, or we could call them little farmers. So again, the focus here will be how does this influence humans, but we want to be able to apply these concepts to other species and populations as well. So, all right, so here we go. Let's take a look at food and nutrition and get a feel for what's been going on with the human population. So, over the past 40 years, the human population has grown an average of about 1.7% per year. So we're seeing this population growth go up. The good news is that food production has increased about an average of 2.2%. Now, these are global numbers. There's going to be variations within each individual country and geographic region and so on. But we go, okay, that means we're growing more food than people. So there's a surplus in the global picture. The challenge then becomes distribution and the quality of the food, the nutritional value, etc. All right, so again, looking at some global information here, the global calorie consumption, the average calorie consumption, how many calories do people eat average across the planet, is around 3,000 kilocalories per day. So again, think about what do we eat? What do we have for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in between? I grabbed a Mountain Dew, got a Snickers bar, hit a drive-through for a milkshake. About, on average, 3,000 calories a day. More developed countries, on average, consume about 3,500 calories a day. So do some quick math here. If the global average is 3,000 and the more developed countries' average is 3,500, if the population sizes were equal, half the population is more developed, half the population was less developed, then we'd say we're eating 3,500, less developed countries are eating about 2,500, and that's where our 3,000 global average comes from. Problem is, though, more developed countries only make up about 25% of the population. So when you factor in population size and percentage of the population, a lot of people in developing countries do not come anywhere close to this 3,000 number. There's a lot of people out there that are chronically malnourished and dealing with what we call food security issues. Okay, so those are things we want to think about. Here's a scary statistic, and these numbers are changing, they're moving targets, but in average, roughly 800 million people on Earth are chronically undernourished. Let me change the font, so let me move this so we can see it. So 800 million people chronically undernourished, meaning they get less than about 2,200 kilocalories per day. Every day. That's not just once in a while here and there. So think about it. That's, 40% fewer calories than the global average. That's why we can have 3,500 in a more developed country, and these folks in these developing countries don't get anywhere close to what we get. Okay, so those are the things we want to talk about, what we want to think about, and discuss. Are there issues that we can address, and how can we work with it? All right, so a couple guys came up with some ideas here when we talk about population growth. Thomas Malthus, might remember that name. He wrote an essay or essays on population growth that actually influenced Charles Darwin's views and perspectives, helped Darwin, not directly, Malthus didn't directly contribute, but his work influenced Darwin's thinking as he was coming up with natural selection. So what we're looking at here with Malthus's population growth is that, let me get the pen out. Let's get a good color. Let's go with blue. Is that as your population grows, so it's going up, and this is exponential growth, as it grows up, it hits a point where resources become compromised. There's not enough food. There's not enough resources. Population's still going up exponentially, but resource growth can't go up as fast or in conjunction. So when your population size crosses that resource size line, you're at what they call a point of crisis. This is a problem because if the population keeps going up and the resources are not there to meet the needs of the population, you're going to have some significant and serious problems. You get some social problems, you get political problems. We just start to see major problems associated with this. So this is where we get into that 2,200 kilocalories a day, because some places geographically don't have the resources to produce this food for their population. So you get lots and lots of problems. There is roughly 1.5 billion people on our planet, and that number is getting larger, but about 1.5 billion people who have less than $1 a day for food. That's not even a hamburger at McDonald's. The dollar menu, add tax. That's it for a day. So there is serious food security issues for 1.5 billion people on this planet. Most of them are sitting in less developed nations. I mean, we do have people in the US who have food security issues. I'm not trying to say that everything's perfect here, but we don't have nearly the percentage that we see in other countries around the world. So when you look at hunger around the world, here's the map. The map's showing us the percentage of total population in these different countries. What percentage of the world's population sits in the US, Australia, Western European nations, etc. Those are developed countries. We have less than 5% of the total population of the planet. Then you look at places like India, countries in Africa. Look at those dark brown countries, the ones down here. Okay, they contain over 35% of the world population, and it is a huge issue because they don't have the resources to grow the amount of food to feed their growing population. They have passed that point of crisis, which is why we see major problems when it comes to food security. Chronic hunger and insecurities are persistent in those populations. It's not an occasional thing, it's a constant in a lot of those countries. And what this leads to are these famines, massive famines, where hundreds of thousands of people die because of this. So when we look at famines, there's a lot of reasons for a famine to occur. A lot of times there's social and political issues that create it. Sometimes it's environmental. the environmental stresses the food production ability, but then if you have social and political issues associated or going on at the same time, you just basically have this perfect storm of problems that's going to lead to major issues in your country. So famines are characterized by some key criteria. Start with food shortage. Okay, so you don't have enough food to feed your people. You have mass starvation. You have social disruption, and you have economic chaos going on all at the same time. And it's a domino effect. As your food supplies decrease, then you start getting into starvation, then you have fighting and groups jockeying for power and control, the economy starts to collapse. All these things create this implosion and massive, massive problems in countries. In some countries, they've been in a famine for a decade. It takes a huge amount of aid to pull a country out of a famine and to try to get them established. Now, other factors that can contribute to this, environmental factors. I'm just going to put a big etc. here. You guys, I'm sure, are able to add more to this list. Fire, flood, famine, or fire, flood, drought, etc. Environmental factors that lead to crop failure sometimes starts the problem off. Okay, so now my crops are failing. How do I provide food for my people? Now I have a food shortage leading to starvation, and so on and so on. So it's not always the environmental trigger. It's not always the environment that lights the fuse of a famine. Sometimes you have inept or corrupt governments that lead to it. Sometimes you have war that leads to famines. You go look at a lot of the history of different African nations and Middle Eastern nations, and all of these things contribute to the potential for famine or the actual famine itself. So again, there's a lot of variables behind this. So if you're trying to prevent a famine, you have to figure out which of these issues is the most likely going to cause it, and then how do we kind of block and prevent or minimize the effect of that famine. And if a country is moving into that, how can we pull that country out? If you go back to the 90s, Somalia, horrible, horrible famine. Just tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people died in that famine. Some of it was starvation, some of it was from war, fighting, inept, corrupt governments. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. And it's taken them decades to get out of it and to try to recover. Odds are they will never fully recover from that famine. So we look at those food issues. That is one side of the spectrum, and definitely a concern and things we have to think about and address. The other side of the spectrum is when we talk about the obesity issue and the obesity epidemic. So this is flipping the coin completely to the other side and going, okay, what's going on with this obesity problem we have in the United States? It's classified as an epidemic. 64% of adult Americans are considered overweight. 33% are classified as obese. 20% are considered over the ideal body weight, and they're carrying this BMI, body mass index, over 30. So in the next lecture, I'll show you guys how to calculate BMI, and we're going to talk about it. And is this really an accurate way to judge if you're healthy or not? All right, so that'll be in part 2.